Hello everyone, Fred here. In this installment of TPP Dynamite, I'm going to be talking about, you guessed it, why James Gunn should not be CEO of DC Studios. First things first though, if you haven't already, let me encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I'm currently at just over 600 subscribers, and I'm really trying to reach 1,000 as soon as possible. I post film, book, and TV series reviews. I do opinion pieces on entertainment, news, and affairs. I'm also an author of adult and young adult mystery novels. I just released a new Hitchcockian short mystery called Gumbo Night today. I'm quite pleased with this one. There's a link to it in my video description below, and I encourage you to check it out as well. With that in mind, and without further ado, I'm going to just jump right into it. So this video has been developing in my brain for quite a while now, and my making it and releasing it just today was partially a calculated decision in reaction to the recently released but ill-advised second season of Peacemaker, which I actually discuss in this video here, and partially just because I recently got a sufficient break from work/life challenges that has allowed me the free time to make it. And I'm going to kick this off with the disclaimer that if you are a gun shield and or averse to hearing the truth spoken in love, this is not the video for you. As anyone who follows this channel knows, it is a 100% truth zone when it comes to entertainment content. I don't pull punches, especially regarding DC Entertainment. I have loved the DC Entertainment brand for about 24 years now, and that love has fueled in me an energy for the brand that emboldens me to speak up anytime I feel like any creative or pencil pusher threatens to ruin it, especially in film or television. James Gunn, as CEO of DC Studios, unfortunately, seems to be making a very good go of doing just that, which I suspected that he might from the front when I first heard that he'd been named co-CEO of DC Studios, and which I've only grown more certain that he will do as I've watched him work in the role for a couple of years now. So guess what? I'm speaking up. Anyway, that said, there are many reasons, many strong reasons for why James Gunn should not be the CEO of DC Studios. In fact, that's probably why he only got the job, because Warner Brothers Discovery was desperate after several other people turned it down. But for the sake of efficiency and clarity, I'm going to cover the three main reasons in this video. And really, I do think that these three main reasons encapsulate all, or at least most, of those other many strong reasons. First, James Gunn is an artist, not a businessman, and there is a major difference between those two things. Businessmen examine problems in terms of dollars and cents. Artists examine problems in terms of personal satisfaction and investment. I'm not saying that artists cannot also be businessmen and vice versa, because they can. It's just that James Gunn is not. Warner Brothers Discovery right now is on the knife's edge of financial ruin, with stock that's been circling the drain for over a year, with billions of dollars in debt, and most importantly with an abundance of audience members and creatives who could not care less about investing in the DC entertainment, television, and film content that makes up a major part of its revenue. Warner Brothers Discovery did make a relatively smart move under David Zaslav in deciding to warehouse all its DC entertainment, television, and film content under one umbrella company in DC Studios back in 2022, bringing some order to the general chaos that had been DC entertainment, film, and television production for the roughly 10 years before. But the next smart move would have been for Warner Brothers Discovery to hire a businessman to run DC Studios moving forward. And that businessman should have been hired with the specific mandate of first rehabilitating the DC entertainment, television, and film brand in the eyes of disillusioned potential paying audiences and disillusioned potential collaborating creatives after Warner Brothers Discovery's epic misfires with basically every DCEU film except for Man of Steel, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and the Justice League Snyder Cut. That businessman should also have been hired with the specific mandate of using the rehabilitated DC entertainment, film, and television brand to help dig Warner Brothers Discovery out of the hole that it's been creating for itself, largely since around 2016 when it was still just Warner Brothers. Instead, Warner Brothers Discovery made the mistake of hiring a niche indie auteur artist in James Gunn. You see, if a businessman had been placed in charge of DC Studios back in 2022, his or her first order of business would have been deciding that the DCEU had become too convoluted, too bloated, too controversial, and generally too unprofitable to justify its continuation. That person would have then decided that the only rational move was to pull the plug on it with a full-scale reboot into either a more carefully crafted DC cinematic universe or even just a series of unconnected DC Comics movies and TV shows emphasizing the sort of quality and substance that could win back the audience members and creatives that the DCEU had been alienating for years with its overall sloppiness. That person would have taken one look at projects like James Gunn's The Suicide Squad or Peacemaker, which were part of the DCEU, and would not have hesitated in calling them critical successes but commercial failures. Because though James Gunn's The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker got generally favorable reviews, The Suicide Squad was, I believe, the second lowest grossing DCEU film behind only Blue Beetle, while Peacemaker did not make any money for Warner Brothers Discovery and didn't even get 1 million views per episode aired on HBO Max. So that businessman would not have had a second thought about canceling all content associated with the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker alongside the rest of the generally failed DCEU. A businessman would have understood that that was the only smart play in terms of dollars and cents. A businessman, just to tell the truth, probably would have also pivoted to building a cinematic universe if that businessman even decided to do a new DC cinematic universe at all instead of just a series of unconnected high-quality films and TV series around probably Matt Reeves' The Batman and the Penguin projects. Because those projects, while far from perfect, were both critically and financially successful for the company. The Penguin less so financially than the Batman, but still winning several major awards. James Gunn, however, is again a niche indie auteur artist. And artists examine problems in terms of personal satisfaction and investment. They usually only want to take on projects that tickle their own fancy, and when they do take on projects, they very rarely elect to throw away their art or put it in a place where others can't see it. So when James Gunn was made CEO of DC Studios, his first instinct was to guide the company into only producing projects that tickled his own fancy and to primarily focus on getting his own art out to as many people as he could. So naturally, he could not make the financially wise decision by doing a hard reboot of the DCEU or putting full support behind a totally new DC cinematic universe or even a totally new roster of unconnected films and television projects, because it would mean deleting his own art. The continuity of his The Suicide Squad movie, his Peacemaker series, the Waller series that he wanted to produce, the Creature Commandos series that he'd already written before he became CEO, and the Superman script that he'd also already written before he became CEO. And he could not get fully behind a future fueled by projects like the Batman or the Penguin, because their style of serious, soulful, gritty, noirish crime fiction does not tickle his own niche indie auteur fancy, which runs towards ensemble casted content that is lewd, crude, and socially unacceptable by everyone except adults with a dark and twisted and generally sexual sense of humor. And that's why instead of going the financially sound route, he made the financially unwise decision of doing a nebulously defined soft reboot of the DCEU that will not make a clean break with the DCU, but will only break with certain parts of it that he either didn't create or didn't like. Moreover, that's why he made the additional financially unwise decision of pushing aside and even cannibalizing Matt Reeves' commercially and critically successful Batman and Penguin projects in favor of propping up and fast-tracking production for a second season of Peacemaker that he released, despite that the first season did not garner the financial results to justify continuation. A first season of Creature Commandos, a second season of Creature Commandos that'll be coming out despite that the first season did not garner the financial results to justify continuation. His movie Superman that was released as the first film in the new and softly rebooted DC Cinematic Universe, despite that James Gunn himself never originally intended the movie to be the first in a cinematic universe and did not even write it as such. as well as sequels to his movie Superman that will release despite that Superman itself flopped financially at the box office. Just these are the kinds of poor decisions that an out of control artist makes, but that a businessman would avoid like the plague. And before you give me that chestnut about how James Gunn is technically only the co-CEO of DC Studios and how Peter Safran is technically his partner and technically responsible for running the business side of DC Studios, don't. Because one, Peter Safran is James Gunn's longtime collaborator and friend. Two, James Gunn himself has said repeatedly that Peter Safran leaves him alone in control of all creative decision making regarding the direction of DC Studios. So, three, Peter Safran was, is, and will be nothing but a bobblehead to James Gunn regarding the DCU's storytelling direction or lack thereof. Second, James Gunn is too present and he talks too much. Rule 16 of the 48 Laws of Power teaches that absence increases respect and honor, that too much circulation makes the price go down, that value and admiration arise from scarcity. The Holy Bible teaches that sin is always present in an abundance of speech, that words should not be released lightly, that the tongue is a world of fiery iniquity that can set one's entire life ablaze if left unchecked. Yeah, the basic principle is this: don't talk too much. A man will never go far unless he masters the art of shutting up, weighing his words, not flying off the handle by releasing every little syllable that enters his brain into the world. The most successful people do not tend to talk all that much. They do not tend to reveal too much of themselves too soon, and they do not tend to be seen all that much either. That applies even more so for a leader of a business, especially a complicated entertainment business. Think about some of the most successful people in entertainment. Artists like Chris Nolan or Tom Cruise or Martin Scorsese, or even plenty of the executives who ran the businesses that produced those men's most successful films when they came out. One thing you'll notice is that these people used a certain silence and absence to build a certain sense of mystery and anticipation around the art that made audiences want to see it. They weren't talking all the time about it, dissecting it before or even after its release. And even the interviews that they gave surrounding it, the promotion, tended to be meticulously curated. Chris Nolan famously does not even use social media. Tom Cruise has agents who maintain accounts for him that he rarely, if ever, personally uses. The same or similar goes for many of the executives who've most consistently done business with the talent of those men's level. These are people who simply are not always seen and heard. They're not always spamming X or Instagram or Threads, discussing every little detail of every little detail that comprises their art. They tend to let the art speak for itself. That absence and that silence creates a sense of reverence for the art. It prevents audiences from negatively prejudging the art based on leaks or unpolished set photos or social media posts that can easily be taken out of context or over-examined. That absence and that silence, frankly, creates something of a security blanket for in case the art doesn't perform as expected. So when a movie like Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning flops at the box office, some people notice, but it's not major news because the artists and executives behind it are not talking about it all the time, trying to spin it like it's a success or justify it to everyone who asks them about it on social media. They carefully emphasize the positive aspects of the art. They don't take the bait from people who try to steer them elsewhere, and then the potential bad press is all but forgotten within maybe 2 months. That absence and that silence, meanwhile, also creates a sense of reverence for the words of the people who create and release the art, because those words are indeed so rare, and because those words are well reasoned enough that they're usually on point. These people are not always running their mouths or their keyboards, as the case may be. They're not always scratching the itch to defend themselves or retort when someone expresses doubts or dissatisfaction with their products. These people spend at least twice as long thinking about what they're going to say as they do saying it. So when they do say it, generally it does not end up being fact-checked or coming across as off the cuff. People respect people whose words have meaning and who are not perceived to be lying or misinformed or both. James Gunn isn't like that. He really should have learned his lesson about talking too much and being too present on social media after his fiasco with Disney, but it doesn't seem like he has. This man plays around on X and Threads and Instagram far too much for a CEO associated with a Fortune 500 company. He seems compelled to immediately sort out random strangers on social media who say things that he doesn't like. And that's gotten him into trouble on multiple occasions when his spurious responses either haven't gone over very well or have later turned out to be untrue, because it's a black mark on the man's reputation every time that it happens, because it makes people question the validity of the man's words, because he's shown to be misinformed about the dealings of his own company at best and straight up lying about those dealings at worst. Like that time when someone brought up Superman's total budget and mentioned those official reports detailing that Warner Brothers Discovery had reported a total number of nearly $364 million. The smart play would have been for James Gunn to just shut up and only address those types of questions if they rose to such a level of importance that they came from journalists and reporters from the most respected outlets in entertainment. Instead, James Gunn, scratching his raging itch to retort, said that the reports were false and that no one could possibly have any idea about Superman's budget, only to be proven wrong when those records were proven to be legitimate and when the total final budget for the film was proven to actually be well near $400 million. You've got that time that James Gunn insisted that Henry Cavill was not being fired, only to later confirm that he was. The time that James Gunn said he'd met with Ben Affleck about directing in the DCU, only for Ben Affleck to say later that he'd never direct a film in the DCU style. All those posts about James Gunn's silly dog Ozu and the dog's role in Superman, which just lessened the movie both before and after its release in the eyes of a certain contingent of potential audience members. And I don't know James Gunn personally, so I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt by saying that maybe he was not lying, but was just misinformed about all those statements that he told for truth, but that were later fact-checked. But that's just the problem. It is the job of a CEO to be informed about the business of his own company, and that's precisely why it is in that CEO's best interest to not shoot from the hip or speak too soon. James Gunn talks too much, and that's what happens when you talk too much. You say things, even accidentally, that are inaccurate or that will be misinterpreted. And this really does tie back into point number one. James Gunn is an artist, not a businessman. His excitement about the art and his desire to discuss and defend the art, specifically his art, supersedes any wiser instincts that might lead him to strategically hold his peace. Third and final point, James Gunn does not have the talent or the track record to justify his taking on a role as important as CEO of DC Studios. He's an artist whose art just isn't that profitable in the final analysis. He's had a very limited, very telling history of financial success with movies he's written and or directed. He is again at his core an indie auteur filmmaker. He would tell you this himself. He has said it himself. He tends to excel at doing very moving, very character-driven, though generally very irreverent ensemble stories, starring misunderstood and or generally unknown characters. And the stories are generally very good, but the trade-off is that they generally do not tend to perform very well financially. James Gunn's only truly successful films at the box office were the Guardians of the Galaxy films, and those films only did as well as they did because they had the backing of Disney, one of the most powerful companies on earth, and because all but the last of those Guardians movies was released during peak MCU. The years when audiences loved the MCU so much that any movie associated with it was going to clean up at the box office. And besides the backing of Disney and its peak MCU brand, James Gunn had the guidance of Kevin Feige, who helped make the Guardians movies more profitable and family-friendly by reining in some of James Gunn's own worst tendencies. The types of tendencies that serve James well when he's making low budget, low return indie movies, but that wreck the brand when he's making content for what's supposed to be a family friendly cinematic universe. The types of tendencies that lead James to shove a scene full of middle fingers in a movie called Superman that's supposed to be for children. The types of tendencies that lead James Gunn to market a hard R-rated show full of substance abuse, gore, cursing, and S-parties as being pivotal to the supposedly kid-friendly universe, including Superman. James Gunn does not have any of those advantages any longer. Warner Brothers Discovery is not nearly as powerful or as beloved as Disney. In fact, the company is in billions of dollars of debt and on the knife's edge of financial ruin. The DC Comics brand also is not nearly as powerful as the MCU's. James Gunn does not have the guidance of a Kevin Feige kind of figure anymore, because if anything, he is the Kevin Feige kind of figure now. Meanwhile, James Gunn's history with DC Comics movies isn't nearly as good as his is with Marvel Comics movies. The Suicide Squad, despite being probably the best Suicide Squad story ever told, was a major box office flop. And you can blame that on COVID. You can blame it on Warner Brothers' questionable corporate decision to release the movie for streaming while it was still in theaters. But the fact of the film's failure still stands. Superman, when you compare its total budget to its box office total, has flopped too. Fewer than 500,000 people watched Creature Commandos per episode. Only a few more than that watched Peacemaker Season 1. Only a few more still are watching Peacemaker Season 2. And those shows are making no money for DC Studios. So yeah, in the end, James Gunn is an artist, not a businessman. He talks too much, and he does not have the talent or track record to justify his being CEO of any company remotely resembling DC Studios. When you consider all those things, I trust you can agree that James Gunn should not be CEO of DC Studios. Anyway, you know the drill. That's just my opinion, though my opinion based on indisputable facts and hard evidence. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Are your feelings more complex? Sound off in the comment section below. Meanwhile, if you like this video and made it this far, don't forget to leave a like, click subscribe, ring that bell, and hey, follow me on social media as well. So long.